Let me introduce the panelists that have joined us. First of all, on the far end is Neil Franklin. Neil is a 32-year law enforcement veteran. He's a former commander for the Education and Training Division and Bureau of Drug and Criminal Enforcement with the Maryland State Police, and has a long policing experience. I'm going to shorten your bio if you don't mind. And is the current executive director, yes, of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Next to him is Adam Jackson. Adam is one of the leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. He's a founder of the Eddie Conway Liberation Institute at Morgan State University, and he is very active in community engagement and political activism and such. Yes, thank you for joining us. And to my right is Brandon Scott. He's a councilman for Baltimore's 2nd District, and he also joined us on our webathon before. And he's works with Big Brothers and Big Sisters in Central Maryland. He's a former community outreach liaison in the Office of the City Council President. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
And I guess that's it. I thought we had someone else, did we? No? Okay. So part of what we're doing tonight is sort of a combination of things. First of all, it's just the beginning. It's a beginning of a discussion. It's a beginning of a debate. And the fundamental question we're going to be investigating, reporting, and creating town halls for is to try to answer the question, if you ran Baltimore, if you ran Maryland in the interest of the majority of its people, what would that public policy look like? So we were going to have just that kind of discussion. And then as Sharmini said at the beginning, in the last 3.5 weeks, first of all, one of our colleagues, Devin, 2 of his cousins were murdered, I think within the space of about a week or a week and a half. Ernest, who works with us, his 24-year-old son was murdered about 2 weeks ago. And it hit me that this, to some extent for us, murder had been a bit of an abstraction. Now, we moved to Baltimore about 2 years ago, and we watched the news and that. And then it occurred to me, well, why? Why is it feeling like murder is somewhat of an abstraction now that it hit home? And it's obvious because I'm white. And if you watch news, you're watching news for white people. There's some basic numbers that tell the story. If you're doing television news in Baltimore, your market for your advertising is not just the city, it's also the county. And there's about 812,000 people or so in the county, and there's 65% white. The city is something like about 650,000 to 630,000 people, and it's 65% black. So already you have more white people in your demographic. Baltimore City, something like 46% of people live under the poverty line. Now your advertisers aren't all that interested in people living under the poverty line. So take out the poor people, and what are you left with? Probably 75% white audience. So go look who's on air, on television in Baltimore. Go look at the staff, the news staff. We went and looked at it for all 3 networks, Fox, ABC, and CBS. It's 75% white. Now look at the murder statistics. So I got it here. 2013, 235 people were killed in Baltimore City, 224 black, 9 white. So far, there's already been 91 murders in Baltimore City, 78 black, 5 white. The truth is, if you're white, this is actually a very safe city. Except the majority of people here aren't. But if you're doing news, who are you speaking to? You're speaking to the people your advertisers want you to speak to. So what is murder for news? Well, it's just another number. That's right. It's not about human beings. It's not about, and something Ernest said to me, Ernest who lost his son, like I said, 2 weeks ago. He talked about the young men that killed his son with as much empathy as he talked about his own kid. Because the victims and the perpetrators are all victims. So that's what we're going to try to do, because we don't have advertisers. We're going to try to do news that understands the victim and the perpetrator are victims. And we need to unpack what makes people in our community victims. And we know it's a multifaceted problem. We don't think at the end of this evening we're going to have the magic solution. But this is the beginning of a process, because the contribution I just started getting big echoes in here, guys. It got too loud. We're hoping and the real news is going to make a small contribution to this solving this problem. But we think that if together with the community, we can become the mainstream news of Baltimore, if we can become the place where the city gets its news, then we can help start changing the political culture of this city. Because for us, these aren't going to just be statistics. Like when we cover murder, we're going to tell you who the person is. We're going to tell you what their life was. The same with the question of the perpetrator. But more than that, we're constantly going to try to unpack what social conditions gave rise to this. And we're never going to have the assumption that that's just the way things are. We don't think this is just chronic. We don't think it has to be this way. We understand we live in a social economic system where certain people own stuff and a lot of people don't. And the people that own stuff have power. And on the whole, they're not getting murdered. So we're not doing news for them. We're happy if they watch. We're happy if they donate. But we're not doing news for them. I learned one thing tonight. Don't ever try to moderate a panel after Heber Brown. So Heber wanted to ask a question at the end of the last panel. So I'm going to co-moderate this with Heber Brown. And go ahead.
Cool. Well, let me add on to that. I think that was a great commentary. You talked about how both victim and perpetrator are both victims. I would say, I would go one step further and say even white people are victims. And white people are victimized by a mentality of white supremacy that gives the illusion of superiority and safety, right? And so if that majority that's watching the news is coddled and nurtured to a mentality that says, you're safe, it's just those poor black folks that's the problem. You are victimized by a sick and sinful, if I may say that, it's not Sunday, but sick and sinful mentality.
I'll say amen.
Amen, thank you. But a sick and sinful mentality that corrodes your soul as well.
That's right.
Yeah, and so we can't leave anybody out of that equation. There's victim, there's perpetrator, but white folks, please don't think you out the equation here. That mentality that you're being conditioned to embrace also is corrosion on the battery of your soul as well. And that's why we have to push this conversation. You're not going to hear that on WBAL. But that's why you have to push that conversation a little bit more and investigate all the different facets. But to Daphne Alston, to Mildred Sammy, the question I was going to ask was I did ask it though, but how do we get to the point where we care enough? You said something in the green room that I said, oh, wait, save that, about how we shock the city to really face and confront this issue of violence on all its levels. Can you share that?
Yeah, I was saying that we were talking about how many people participated in the march today. And of course, it's always the same, probably 6 or 7 moms and some of our regular followers. For some reason, we're not reaching the masses. We have to change the way we're doing stuff. We need to go into these places. Jesus went into the wilderness. We didn't go into a building and see. He walked among the people, and he did. We have to walk among these people and go show them love and show them that poverty isn't the answer today. Sometimes you can change their mindsets. They'll pick up in other things. But it's so hard for me. We march, Miss Mildred and I mean, we're out in the streets, Westport, places that most men and cameras and people choose not to even go. And if we can talk to these young men, and which we do all the time, and they respond to us, then we need everybody to go there and show this is not, like he was saying, it's not a black or white issue. It's an issue. I was so upset this week to watch that there's a $1,000 reward that's been on my son's life for 6 years, and I have to sit on TV and watch $80,000 and $90,000 being put away for an animal that was mistreated. We have demoted our children down to animals, and it doesn't make sense, and nobody speaks out. Nobody speaks out about that. Who's going to turn my son's murder in for $1,000? You understand what I'm saying? I'd rather go around catching animal burners and make that money myself. That's what we're saying, that these young black men are nothing, they're less than animals. And we have to stop that. because it doesn't have any color. Like he was saying, you think you're safe. They're going to push, these kids are out here and they're angry and upset. But the statistics that you read, there are no black kids going to killing no white people. They know that they can get away with it in their communities and neighborhoods because we don't speak out and we're not touching these kids in the right places. They're not going to go do anything to another nationality of people because it's a cultural fact that needs to be changed in our communities that this black on black killing is okay. And tell you the truth, we've had 300 and 400 murders in Maryland probably 20 some years. All of a sudden now everybody wants to be so interested in it. And I just chose to do this mom's organization. I don't need nobody speaking for me about my child who hasn't experienced what I've gone through. We go talk to these young men and tell them, you don't want your mother to feel this, you don't want your mother to feel that. This is all your mother's going to have. You don't want to put your mother through that pain. And everybody knows that a young black man loves his mother. So we have to take charge. I no longer need the mayor or the police chief or anybody speaking to these children. The mothers in the community, we have got to get out here and speak to our own children. Thank you.
Brandon, you want to get in? Go ahead.
Ladies first.
I would like to say that I somewhat do not concur about, I mean, I know there's a lot of black on black crime, but we have to let people know that they are not exempt from this. Even white people get killed, and to me, when they get killed, it's massive, like Newtown and Colorado and Ohio, these school killings, they're massive when they do attack the white race. You know, I'm saying to everyone, don't think that it can't happen to you. Don't think that you cannot get that phone call or that knock on the door telling you that someone in your family has been murdered. It's occurring, so it's normal now. It's like every other home is affected by murder these days, and that has got to stop. So that's all I basically have to say.
Bounce pass to the right side of the table.
I'm not co-moderating anymore.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
But on this side of the table, I think it's interesting that we've talked about interpersonal violence on this side of the panel. On this side, I see people who in different respects represent more the systemic arenas of society. And as I look out on the activists and world changers in front of me, I think about a gentleman named Glenn Ross, an East Baltimore activist, right? He was the first one who told me, Brandon, councilman, he told me that ghettos aren't born, they're created. Right. And he really schooled me on the intentionality of the creating really a perfect storm and mix of conditions that give rise to the degree of interpersonal violence we talked to on this side. Can you speak a little bit about that?
I can, but I just got to go back to your first question first. I think the sister hit on a very important point when she said that places that men won't go. Men. And this is something that is near and dear to me because when you talk about community activism in Baltimore, when you talk about PTAs, community associations, coaching, whatever it is involving our young people and specifically our young African American men, there are no men there. There are only women. There are no men there. You know, I had the pleasure, and still now, but last year, of being one of the co-founders of the 300 Men March Movement, and we had 600 men walk North Avenue, east to west, and back again. And what I said to them then, and I'll say it again now, that was just the start. We had 600 for the first march. The second march, we had 200. The third, we had 100. Now we're down to just 40 men who just go out. No one else is going to save these young black boys other than black men stepping up and being involved in their lives. Black women have carried the brunt of what's going on in our communities as far as activism and being there for these children for far too long. But at the end of the day, they cannot teach them how to pee, as my good brother says. They cannot teach them how to pee. And what we have to realize is that the breakdown in that structure of not having men involved in the lives of these young men is something that is astronomical and can never be replaced. If you go to whatever mentoring organization you have in the city, and we have hundreds, if not thousands of them, all of them are waiting for men to step up to be mentors, but men act like they're allergic to kids. And you know, that's how we have to keep challenging them and embarrassing them and letting them know. I say all the time, you're not a man if you're not. If you know who shot a 14-year-old boy and you're not saying something. Because we know someone in Cherry Hill know who shot Najee. We know someone in Cherry Hill is helping a man, a grown man, so to speak, and I use that term loosely, is hiding this person. You're not a man. A man would step up and no, it shouldn't have cost $1,000. They should say, for free, I know who shot this little boy. For free, I know who shot this little girl. And that's something that we have to look at because we don't talk about a lot the lack of presence of men in our community. And I'm sorry, Heber, I know that wasn't the question you wanted me to ask, but I had to say it because it was on my heart. But to your other question, we all know, especially in the city of Baltimore, the historic and systemic things from the projects that are now gone and the houses and row houses, and even as I tell Adam, all the time, you even look at where the rec centers were built in the city of Baltimore. This city and the ghetto neighborhoods were built for black people to never have to leave their neighborhood, for them to go to school, be born, live, and die, work and die in their neighborhood. And we have to break down those barriers and those walls. I grew up in Park X, as many people know. And the only reason why I experienced things that my colleagues and my friends didn't experience is because my family would not let me be limited to that neighborhood because so many of them did not go. You know, they didn't go any further than Drew Hill Park when we went to swim. They never went to even to Mondawmin Mall, let alone go downtown. You know, when I have young children who tell my best friend who's a teacher in West Baltimore, who can see out of Emerson Avenue, the back of the house downtown, and say they never went there until we took them to the Orioles Fan Fest. It says that that systematic stuff has become cultural, and we've taken that in, and we have to break that down if we're going to get to talking to these root problems that we have all across the city, but not just the city of Baltimore, all across these United States of America.
Part of the issue. This is just the beginning of a discussion, and I always thought this is a kind of two-part discussion, which is what can the community do now on its own, and what can it demand in terms of public policy, and especially demand public policy that's in the interest of the majority of people. And clearly one of the public policies I personally think is the most destructive is the drug policy, which ties into criminal justice and why almost hardly a family in Baltimore hasn't been touched by some kind of arrest, and which stays with these kids for their whole life. So Neil Franklin works on these issues. Could you give us a bit of the context of the drug policy and a little bit of what you think is the solution?
Well, more than happy to do that. First, I just want to say that the Real News Network and what they've done here is an avenue of solutions, towards solutions here in Baltimore. And I encourage everyone who's here and who's watching to embrace and to be a part of what's going on here with the Real News Network. It's an opportunity for us, but it's only as good as what we make of it and what we take of it. So the drug war, I don't think that many people realize just the extent of it and the effects that it has upon our communities, not just nationally, but also internationally. From it being a foundation of much of the violent crime that we have within our communities. That it also has a foundation of that contributes to the addiction problems that we have within our communities that continue to go unsolved, because managing drugs in our communities is not a criminal justice issue. It's a health issue, number one. And we don't treat it as a health issue. We treat it as a criminal justice issue, which then leads to mass incarceration. Why is that so significant? Because you hear over and over again the term family. Men, fathers, mothers, and we hear it over and over again. We know what the problems are. We talk about them all the time, not just here for the first time, but year after year, week after week, month after month. We talk about the problems. You know, we talk about the violence among our young people. We talk about the criminal justice policies that we have. We talk about the police and how they interact or don't interact appropriately with our communities and the disparity issues, and we talk about those problems all the time. So what are some of those solutions? First of all, we have to realize, as we're hearing here, that, you know what, if we don't have healthy families, you're not going to have a healthy neighborhood. And if you don't have healthy neighborhoods, you're not going to have a healthy community, therefore a healthy city. So why aren't our families healthy? There are many reasons. The lack of jobs, of course, you know, the housing issues that we have and so on. But the drug war is a significant barrier to solving problems, to moving forward. I mentioned the violence within our communities, which ties directly to the unemployment issues that we have within our communities. People have to make money in this world because you have to buy food, you have to pay for housing, you have to pay for all those other things that you need to survive. Then we, the police, are called in to deal with that violence. And what do? We come in and occupy. And we just don't go after those who are involved in the drug trade. Anyone who moves within that community, we go after. You can't tell me you haven't gone through this city and not seen our young black men sitting on curbs in the rain, time after time after time, cars being stopped, taken out of their cars, looking for drugs. And it doesn't matter whether you're involved or not, because if you're black and if you're a young man in these communities in Baltimore City, you're automatically guilty. You're automatically suspect. Now, what does that do, you know, regarding the relationship of police and community? Now, there's not a police official in this country that will tell you that you can be effective in solving violent crime without the cooperation of the community. Okay, so for that reason, we don't have the cooperation of the community because we don't trust the police. Another reason we don't cooperate, citizens do not feel comfortable in cooperating with the police. The Dawson family was mentioned earlier, I believe when we were back in the room there talking. Okay, so when you try to do as a citizen in working with the police to get the drug dealers off of the corners, and let me tell you something about drug dealers. We all know them. They're relatives, they're brothers, they're sisters, they're cousins, they're nephews, they're uncles, so don't act like you don't know who the drug dealers are, okay? But when you do what the police want you to do, and then you're not protected from the retaliation from that, there's fear. And fear will prevent citizens from working with the police to find and to apprehend the violent perpetrators within our communities. So what are some, and there's so much more regarding this drug trade, but I want to wrap this up with talking about solutions. What can we do right now? And what's happening in some of the other cities across the country where we're starting to see, you know, declines in violent crime. One of the significant things is they started to rebuild that relationship between police and community. What they've done, what they're able to do right now, these nonviolent drug crimes have become the lowest priority for police. They're not stopping people and searching them all the time and pulling them out of cars and making them sit on the curbs in the rain. So they're able to improve the relationships between police and young people. Okay, what else are they doing? They're rediverting their financial resources, which are limited. You know, currently we're spending $50 billion plus every year on a drug war, police, courtrooms, and prisons in this country, okay, on a drug war. How about spending some of that money? How about making some federal grants available, some state grants available for many of the organizations that we see within this room right now? You know, those mentoring organizations, okay? The recidivism organizations, those who are dealing with formerly incarcerated people when they come out of prison, okay, to help them get back into the workforce. It's not an easy thing once you have a drug conviction or even a drug arrest on your record to get a job. But there's one industry that will hire you. It is the drug trade. That's right. They don't even ask for a resume. They don't care what you're, well, actually, they probably prefer you to have a criminal record. Okay, so, you know, those solutions, we have to lobby City Hall. We have to lobby, and this is a great time. It's election season. Right. And some of you have already voted. But for those of you who have not voted on Tuesday, you have to do your research and find out what your politicians stand for and what they represent, what their platforms are, and then hold them to it. But then again, you have to introduce your interests to them and make them support your interests. That's why they're there for you. Right. So, you know, I just want to say, do your homework and your research on the drug war and how it affects all of us. mainly the black community, and the violence within our black community is what we're talking about here now. So.
I mean, one of the things we're going to do at the Real News is that it's clear, and I've actually personally learned a lot from Neil and the other people in LEAP. I mean, this war on drugs is not a misguided policy. This war on drugs is a policy that is making a lot of people a lot of money, and I don't mean drug dealers.
That's right.
So there's I'm not sure if it was you or someone else, Neil, in LEAP, that told me that go look at when the marijuana busts are. They're so often 2 hours before the end of a shift, because if you bust somebody just before the end of your shift, you get 5 hours of overtime. So that's a small example when you put it against the money being made into building prisons and judges and lawyers and all the rest.
Civil
That's a
assets,
massive
forfeiture
industry.
dollars, federal grants, and on and on. It's
So one of the things we're going to
big
do
money
is
maker.
unpack this. We're going to do, with LEAP and others, we're going to do a lot of investigative journalism, because this is not a misguided policy. This is a deliberate policy that does not mind if it's destroying people's lives, because it's making a lot of people a lot of money. And the least of the culprits of all this are the drug dealers.
Absolutely.
Adam, weigh in.
I think what I would offer to this conversation is that people should generally be more intellectually curious and more politically astute when looking at the ramifications of white supremacy and public policy. And I'll give specific examples. So when we're talking about issues of violence or drug policy specifically, people think about it only on the side of direct violence that's inflicted on black folks in terms of drug addiction, people who are mass incarceration, things of that nature. But people don't think about white supremacy affecting the direct services that are offered to people as a result as being affected by white supremacy. And I'll be specific to Baltimore. In Baltimore, there are lots of nonprofits ran by white people, ran by white foundations, ran by people who have good intentions. And the problem is that we don't see how that industry is infected with specific mindsets that are set by white supremacy. And I'll give an example. So I would not trust my child in the hands of a white woman who runs an organization that claims to rehabilitate people who get out of prison. I wouldn't trust my child with them, not because I don't trust white people, well maybe, but generally speaking, we should figure out ways to build institutions that are independent that serve our communities, and every other community does it, except for black people. And the problem is that we don't have those conversations. We don't have those conversations that allow us to think differently about how we address the problems. Because from my perspective, I'm only 26 years old, and I grew up in West Baltimore. But the issue I see is that we want new things, but we're not willing to do new stuff. We're willing to feed into the same systems that, not just on the end of the prison industrial complex, but the nonprofit industrial complex. Those industries that are created to manage our suffering and oppression, as opposed to solving the problem. Because people make money on both ends. People make money when we're selling drugs, when we go to prison, and they make money when we get out of prison and we need to get rehabilitated or we need to get jobs. And the problem is that no one's questioning how those two industries are affected by white supremacy and racism. So the task and the solution, and especially in a city like Baltimore, is to build black institutions that serve us, that are independent of other places that give us money. Because what happened, and people who work in nonprofits know the game. You work in nonprofits, you know who you have to please, you know who you have to talk to, you know who you have to serve up the ladder. And the thing is, you're worried more about getting grant money and nonprofit dollars as opposed to fixing the problem. No CEO of any nonprofit in Baltimore should be making a six-figure salary. No one. Because if you're actually trying to solve the material conditions of black people in Baltimore, you shouldn't be getting paid six figures. You should be working in the communities that you claim to solve for. And so that's part of what I do, and that's what I see in my work as being a part of building independent institutions. And I think that that's probably the part that always frustrates me about, not about like town halls proper, but about the solution part. Because people aren't willing to talk about that part, because that's where the money is and that's where the resources are. And if black people in Baltimore are serious about solving the material conditions of their people in that regard, that's where we have to actually get in and figure out ways to build independent institutions. Places like the Real News are a good way to have these conversations started, because partnerships with independent black institutions are good, because it allows us to have a bigger platform and to be able to get to other folks who need to build from the ground up. But we shouldn't be relying on white people with resources. We should be building resources for ourselves that are not dependent on foundations, that are not dependent on nonprofits, that are not dependent on the mayor, that are not dependent on the city council, that are not dependent on any other resource but ourselves.
And Adam, I would add to that. I agree, and I would say when you talk about building independent black institutions, I got to show my bias. There is an independent black institution that has for a long time been that organization that has brought black money, black people, and a black agenda together. Some people like, and you're thinking about the civil rights movement, I'm talking about the black church. Some people like to think about the civil rights movement, and of course, Dr. King.
That's right.
Do you not know he was a Baptist preacher? And it was the independent black institution that helped provide the power and leeway for him to say what need be said without fear of some CEO of some company or some nonprofit foundation saying, no, you can't say that. So I think in addition to building, I would say it's time to go back to church. There are pastors who are watching me, working on your sermon for tomorrow morning, praying for you. But I would say to the pastors and to the churches in the city as well, what a grand and great opportunity. I mean, Lord, in Baltimore City, you have thousands of black churches right next to the liquor stores.
That's right next to 'em.
And what would happen if even a fraction of these black churches wrap their minds and their ethos around an agenda that said it's time to empower ourselves? And I like what you said, how you said it, in partnership with non-black institutions, those who truly want to be allies. I think that's great opportunities there. But I say again, it's time to go back to church.
Well, let me
But I say, sorry to interrupt, but I say to that, it's time for the churches to go to the streets.
I agree.
This isn't a street where Heber is going to be doing noon